And we are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and today we are going to be talking about the Star Wars deck building game. Now, if you're familiar with other deck builders, you probably already mostly know how to play this game. This is a $38 purchase at your local game store, and it's a self-contained one box version of a deck builder. So on the upside, you are not going to be doing like the legendary deck builder where there's 100 expansions you have to chase down in order to play this game. On kind of the other side, it does mean what's in this box has one potential drawback is that it could get really samey pretty quickly because there aren't that many cards. To begin, I do not like this rulebook. There isn't a lot to this game. In fact, I'm going to break down the rules because there are some interesting rules. There are a lot of things I like about this game. And I'm going to talk about that stuff as we go through this. Overall, this rulebook has a lot of kind of dead space. I'm not crazy about how it's laid out. And there is a couple of things that I found a little bit irritating in that there's some alternate game modes back here, but they aren't really distinctive. They don't really bring a whole different flavor to the game. It just kind of feels like they weren't sure what the best rule set was, so they went with all of them. To kind of wrap up things on the rulebook here, there's also some game rules for like 2v2 multiplayer. It says to go to the Fantasy Flight Games website, but as of the recording of this video, those rules are not there. Similarly, it says that there is a tutorial on the website, and while there is a video where they revealed the game and played a game, and over the course of that hour-long video, you can get a pretty good grasp on how the game is played, there isn't a straight-up just, here's how to play Star Wars Deck Builder video. So it's a little weird to me that they released the game and then had stuff in the instruction book saying, go here for these extra rules and for this extra content, and it's just not there. I'm sure it'll be there at some point, but seems like overall there's an impression that I get from the rules that they're a little loose. And I am familiar with Caleb Grace as being one of the designers behind Marvel Champions, and there's been some times in that game where the rules have been just a little looser than I tend to like. Coming from a competitive background, I like my rule sets to be very, if this, then that. I like very tight rule sets. In the co-op gaming space, things can be a little bit squishier because we're all on the same side. So I kind of get it, but it's not my favorite state of being. That said, let's look past these criticisms of the instruction book and let's dig into the actual game. So what you get in the box actually packs quite nicely, and the set that I have here has the promotional sleeves on it. So you can fit the stuff in here if you don't sleeve your cards, and you can fit the stuff in here with the actually quite nice. I do really like these promotional sleeves, and it all fits perfectly well in the box, as well as you have your resource tokens. Now, a note on these resource tokens. They're not very good. So if you played King of Tokyo or 100 other games that track stats using these cubes, these are the same size of cube that you're going to be familiar with. But these have like a glossy finish to them, and the edges are rough, and it just looks a little cheapy, a little chintzy. Now, overall, the price point of this game, like I said, is only 38 bucks. So the idea that they had to kind of maybe cut a corner here or there so they couldn't get the premium resource cubes, and the fact that these resource cubes largely play just a stat tracking role, they could be substituted with a pen and paper for the most part. I kind of understand why we ended up with the cubes that we got in the box, and including anything is nice, but again, from Fantasy Flight, I do tend to expect like that little extra bit of polish, and these cubes kind of fail to meet my expectation there. In this game, you're always going to either be playing as the Empire or the Rebels, and the way you win is by destroying the opponent's series of bases. One of the squishy points in the rules is that in the how to play, it suggests you play a 3-base game. So once 3 bases are destroyed, the person who destroyed 3 bases first wins, the game is over. But in some of the alternate rules, they say, oh, you can play with 4 or 5 bases. So it does have that flexibility, and you can make the game go a little longer if you want a longer game. You can tune it for a shorter game. And that's cool, I guess. But again, I like a rule set to just be like, this is the rule. The standard way to play this is 4 bases. If you want to do different, you can, but this is the standard. And I don't get the impression from the way the rulebook is written that they really had a hard standard that this is the optimal way to play the game. So let's talk about kind of the mechanics of the game. So one interesting thing, again, like I said before, if you've played deck builders, you know a lot of what this game is already. But one of the interesting and unique mechanics in this game is the force track. Now, the force track by itself doesn't do anything. unless you get it all the way to your side or your opponent gets it all the way to their side. When the force tracker is all the way on one side, at the start of your turn, you get one additional resource. So let's talk about the currencies in this game. There's actually 3 currencies. Anytime you play a card that has a currency generation on it, the symbol that it gives you is going to be in the same place as on this 3 segmented place every time. So the top is always going to be attack value. The middle is always going to be resources. The fact that they aren't named credits, I think, is a little bit of a missed opportunity. This is a Star Wars game. Like, there is flavor all over this game. And it's actually not the thickest layer of flavor, but it's the right layer of flavor. I really like how they incorporated this as Star Wars. But one missed opportunity, in my opinion, is that they called the resources resources and not credits. And there's even cards in here that make reference to Republic credits. So just that was a little weird to me. Cards, in addition to credits, they can generate force. And what force does is it moves this little cube along this track. One other thing that I have a kind of a small criticism of, the rebels are red in this game. And I think that comes down to the fact that often the rebel symbol is pictured in red. But when I think about Star Wars, and if you look at the picture of Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, which one of these guys has the red lightsaber? I think red goes with bad guys. I think blue should have been the rebel color, or even green, given that the art they chose for the cover of the box, Luke Skywalker with a green lightsaber. I do not like the blue-red assignment, and it has been confusing for, I think, everybody in my playgroup that I've taught this game to. So, minor criticism there, though. It really doesn't matter. So, while you're playing this game, you play your cards, and you generate resources by playing them. So, you will either get you'll either get resources, you'll get force, or you will get attack. When cards are in the row, they are either going, and by the way, this is another flavor point that I really like. The purchasing area in this deck builder is called the Galaxy. So they nailed the flavor there. This is the Galaxy row. And the idea that these are characters that populate the Star Wars universe that are spread out throughout the galaxy, and you can recruit them and you can fight them, I think that's brilliant. I really like this part of it. And I think it's really probably the single best element of the game is how you interact with the purchasing area. So if you're familiar with typical deck builders, you're going to play your cards, you're going to need to get your resources, which are these yellow cubes, and then you can spend these to pay the cost of the cards that are facing you. So if I'm on the Empire side, this Empire card is facing me, so I can purchase it. But if you look at this Rebel card, there's also text along the top here. You can't use your credits, your resources, to purchase that card, but you can use your attack to bounty hunt that character. So there's essentially 2 mechanics called bounty hunt and sabotage, but they both mean using your attack value. Instead of going after your opponent's base and pushing for the win condition, you can snipe that powerful Luke Skywalker card out of the row before your opponent has a chance to get it. You can't take out Jabba the Hutt because he's a neutral card. So neutral cards can't be bounty hunt, can't be salvage or sabotage, but they can't be attacked at all, but they can be purchased by either player. There are also cards in this deck that, instead of being in your traditional portrait orientation, are landscape. So if it's a Empire card and we're the Empire player, it would face us. You'll notice there's no upside down text on this card for the Rebel player to interact with, so they can't attack this one. And similarly, Rebel ships would be played in that way. There are also neutral capital ships, and those neutral capital ships are played, again, so that their text is not facing either player. So like the Sea Rock Cruiser here would be played kind of... So you do end up with a little bit of awkwardness in the Galaxy row, that there's different orientations, both for the card art on the cards, but also different orientations for how the cards need to be laid out in the Galaxy row. And it seems a little confusing at first, but it actually flows really well. This is, I think, the gem, the high point of this whole deck building experience is how well they implemented the purchasing area, the Galaxy row. There are also some neutral cards that you have a whole stack and they're all the same thing, and these would be like brown coats in Firefly Legendary, stack of cards that aren't very good, that you don't necessarily want in your deck, but it's better than wasting that 2 resources, and these are Outer Rim pilots. When we start, we get a deck of cards that is not very good. very low resource generation and not a lot actually able to be done with your initial deck. So when you start playing this, you want to be purchasing cards out of the purchasing area, the galaxy row, that give you more attack, more credits, more everything. Ultimately, the force tracker is not something that I think you need to invest a lot of your time in fighting over. You just don't want it to be all the way to your opponent's side because you don't want them to get that extra resource each turn. There are cards in the deck that say things like if the force is on your side, and what that means is that it is, if you're a rebel, if the force is in any of these three spaces, or for the Empire, it's the opposite three. So when it's in the middle, it's neutral. But when the force is in any of the spots towards you, because this will be facing players, in the same way that the cards in the Galaxy row face players, so does the force tracker. If it's on your side, there are cards that get additional benefits, but they're not make or break benefits. It's not something you need to build your whole deck around. But if you are playing your deck in such a way that you've got a lot of cards that benefit from having the force, well, then that makes fighting for the force a little bit more valuable. But overall, by itself, this is something you can pour resources into that doesn't really do anything alone. You need other stuff to go with the force in order to get true value out of that. So, like any deck builder, you buy cards out of the row, you try to buy cards that let you buy other additional, better cards, and then you start to exile cards out of your deck and get rid of the cards that you're not super into, like the ones that come in the starting deck. The last kind of factor of this game that we haven't touched on yet is these bases. And the bases all have, both factions have a starting base that doesn't do anything other than start. And then they all have a hit point value. So once my base takes 16 damage, it goes into my opponent's victory point area. And once we have my opponent has three of these bases, they win the game, unless we decide we're going to play to four or whatever else. Each of the bases has effects, except for the first one. Each of the bases has effects that happen when they come into play, like letting you buy a card for free out of the galaxy, or letting you move the force tracker, or the rebels have a base that prevents the first two damage you take every turn, which is pretty strong. Another difference between this and kind of your typical deck builder is that the capital ship cards, the landscape orientation cards, actually stay in play and have to be dealt with before your opponent can hit your base. So if I've got this Hammerhead Corvette, and I wouldn't be able to have Endor because that's a Empire location, but I have this Hammerhead Corvette in front of Jeddah, my opponent is not going to be able to do any damage to the base until they do all four damage to this Corvette and get it out of the way. These cards also stick around, not only to defend, but they generate resources. So you get two resources when this thing comes into play, and you get two resources at the start of the next turn if it's still in play and your opponent hasn't destroyed it. So that kind of breaks down the general flow of the game. Each turn, you draw 5 cards, you play all the cards that you can. Once a card's in play, you don't have to use its abilities immediately, but you can sequence it. So you can dump your hand to the board and then go, okay, I'm going to activate this guy for an attack. I'm going to activate this guy for that. I've got buy these resources. The galaxy row is filled back up as soon as a card is purchased from it. So there's always a bunch of stuff to get there, which does sometimes end up in the situation where you buy a one-cost Jawa and then it reveals your opponent's big bomb like Darth Vader. And no, I just fed you such a good card. Overall, if you have played other deck builders before, and if you are deeply invested in any of them, like if you're a huge Legendary fan or a huge Star Realms fan or whatever it is, I don't think this game does enough that it is going to dislodge you from that other game being your favorite. While I do very much like a lot of what this game has going on, it isn't doing too much that really revolutionizes the deck building space. The interaction with the Galaxy Row is pretty interesting, but there are only 90 cards in the Galaxy deck to begin with, and over not very many games, you're going to end up seeing basically all of them. There are duplicates of most cards, but there are a bunch of unique cards, which are one of, so you won't see Luke Skywalker every game, but there will be over 2 or 3 or 4 games, he's going to pop up. Everybody's going to pop up. So pretty quickly, you can start seeing which cards have, I mean, anytime there's asymmetrical powers, it's never exactly even. There's always better and worse stuff. And while I don't think there's necessarily huge stinkers in this game, I think all the cards, generally speaking, have a place where they can be played. There are better cards and worse cards, and there's more exciting cards and more fun cards. And they did a good job of making sure that the characters you really want to play, like Han Solo, have a presence here in this game. Director Krennic, I'm less convinced anybody's really hounding to play that guy. I'm also a little disappointed that we didn't get a Yoda. Like, where is Yoda in all of this? We do have Jen Urso and Cassian Andor in here, so it does kind of imply that this game is set in this post Fall of the Republic era of the Star Wars universe. And kind of the closest we get to seeing another Jedi other than Luke Skywalker himself is this neutral card called a Keldor Mystic. Now, to me, this is just Plo Koon, right? Like, this is just the Jedi. But maybe I'm being not kind to the people of Keldor. Maybe they all look the same over there, and I'm confusing this mystic with an actual Jedi. There's also a Rhodian bounty hunter, which is just Greedo. Why is this not just Greedo? Please. So there's a couple places where I feel like they had the opportunity to maybe push the flavor a little bit more. Overall, though, this is a very fast-paced game, and I really like that about this. This is the kind of game that my kid can say, "Hey, Dad, can we fit this in?" And if it's 20 minutes to bedtime, we can say, okay, we're only going to play to two bases this time because we don't have the time to do a full three base game. But if we have all the time in the world, hey, let's play to five bases. Let's play with all 10 bases and play just the longest game ever and have decks that are like 50 cards deep. Like that kind of thing is doable within this game. The artwork overall, really my only complaint about the artwork is that it doesn't take up enough of the card. I like pretty much all the art that's in here, and they really hit it out of the park with, like, Darth Vader in particular looks awesome, and Darth Vader should look awesome. So I do feel a lot of positivity towards this game. I wish the card text boxes were a little bit smaller so we could see a little bit more of that awesome artwork, but the currency system is really intuitive. It's easy to understand. I do feel like the Force maybe doesn't quite do as much as I would like it to. So to kind of run down here at the end of the video, my overall thoughts on this game. This is a thumbs up. This is a big thumbs up for me. But specifically, it's a thumbs up if you like deck builders and you like Star Wars. Now, I'm okay with deck builders. I have some others that I'm really a pretty big fan of, but it's not my favorite genre of game. I much prefer to build my deck and bring a constructed deck to play. That's why Versus is my favorite game. But overall, it's not a genre of game that I like hate on or have animosity towards. But I came to it kind of thinking like, oh, this is another deck builder, and it did pleasantly surprise me with how the flavor was implemented and how the Galaxy Row in particular, mechanically, the ability to attack my opponent's cards and get them out of there. I think that's a really cool kind of twist on the deck builder space, and that's probably the most interesting thing that this game does. Everything else outside of the way that you interact with the Galaxy Row feels very familiar. Now, just because something's familiar, that's not really a criticism. That's, if another game does something really well and you implement that mechanic into your game, that's fine. But what does your game do that's unique? And this game does answer that question. It does have unique features that I think are pretty appropriate. I do have some pretty strong criticism for the lack of Yoda in this game. I would like to see R2-D2. I would like to see 3PO. And based on how this all packs, and I do for the most part very much like how this game packs, especially giving us space for sleeved cards. Too many games fail to take into account that when people spend money on games, they want to take care of them and put them in sleeves. Even games that give you sleeves, promotionals, which are quite nice, even games that do something like that, they don't always make the insert accommodate that. The drawback to this insert, though, is this box is pretty full. We could fit a few more cards in here, maybe, but the idea that we could get additional bases, that's not really going to fit. And sadly, there's a lot of wasted space here. Both of the player areas, now I can't get this card back out, both of the player areas have this deep well here and nothing to put in it. So that's again a minor criticisms are the only kind of criticisms I have for this. At the price point of $38 in the US at your local game store, I'm sure you can find it cheaper on the internet somewhere, but like support your local game stores. Uh, at that price point for the quality of this game, I think it hits all the marks. I have a lot of positive things to say about it. I do think having an incomplete rule book and telling players to go to a website to get the complete rule book and not having the rule book there is a little bit of a miss, especially for day one. And this video is being filmed about a week after the game came out, and they still haven't rectified that. So I do think they need to address that. Like, give us the 2v2 rules. It says in the instruction book that you have to buy 2 sets in order to play 2v2. So my game group, we got our 2 sets, we go to the website, and the rules aren't there. Okay, you got me with the upsell, Fantasy Flight, but now I want to be able to play 2v2. How do we do it? So there are a few drawbacks here. The colors between Rebel and Empire didn't totally make sense to me. The squishy rules are not my favorite. But despite these minor criticisms, and again, I acknowledge pretty much all my criticisms here are minor, it's all either aesthetic or it's not a big deal. And the positives, I think, really outweigh that. If you're a Star Wars fan, if you're looking for a game that can be very quick, and even the games that go a little longer still have a fast pace to them, which I really like. It's accessible on the box. It says 2 players, 30 minutes. I think 30 minutes is totally reasonable. We've certainly played games faster, but again, it's an adjustable game length based on the number of bases that you have. So you can kind of tailor the experience to be exactly what you want from it. And while I have criticized the game for that tailoring, for that squishiness in the rules, I can see how that could be actually a feature, not a bug, for some number of players. If you have younger kids who like Star Wars, you could play this with them and maybe only play 1 or 2 bases because of attention span, and you could still get the game in and still have a good time. If you have players who really want to sit down and dig into a longer game, you can make this game longer. And that's one of the things about deck builders. There are games that outstay their welcome, where you kind of hit the point where you want the game to be over by the time it's over. And one of the things that I think I run into with deck builders a lot is that you don't want the game to be over. You've reached the point where your deck is awesome and you're ready to do awesome things, and the game just ends and you don't get to have that powerful moment. So if you want to stretch this out and have more deeper experiences with your powerful built decks, you can definitely do that. And I think that's probably a positive. So while I personally am not a super huge fan of the squishy rules, I can see how that adjustability, giving that adjustability to players, is going to make the game appeal to a wider range of players. So my closing thoughts on Star Wars, the deck building game. I've already revealed that I give this a thumbs up. I absolutely do. At the price point that you get it, what is in the box is actually pretty impressive. I'm very happy with the overall look and feel of the cards. I really like the promotional sleeves that came with the game. I like how the game packs in the box. The small number of criticisms that I have, again, are just aesthetic for the most part, and given how minor they are, it can't do anything to really hold this game back from being a thumbs up from me. I genuinely enjoy this game, and I had planned on skipping this one. I thought, I don't need another deck builder in my life. It's not my favorite genre. I like Star Wars, but there's a million Star Wars games. And I would have skipped this game were it not for patron of the show, Obs, asking for specifically this review. So thanks to Obs for talking me into purchasing this game, which I actually genuinely like a great deal. This has been the build phase review of Star Wars the Deck Building Game. I'm Mr. Ben. Go win some games. Oh, apparently we're not done here. We have one more opinion we need to share before this review is complete.
I mainly am just here to explain how I feel about the game. Something I want to mention is about how the damage numbers are going to get, once you get into the late game, get super high. I think I've been attacked for like 23 before.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, it makes sense because if you're like buying capital ships or that kind of thing, or if you're playing Rebels, you can have Hoth, you can just absorb so much damage. Like, there was a game where I had multiple capital ships that would just heal me, and I think that's kind
That
of
was very frustrating.
yeah, the
Yeah,
Rebels
when you healed like 30 points over the course of a game.
the damage numbers get really high, yes, but that's also because the game, I think, expects you for the most part, to get capital ships, to get multiple ways to defend yourself, or to like start getting your own heavy hitters. So then it becomes a damage race. So I feel like it kind of works really well, but then again,
Have you had any games where you felt like even though you had changed your deck, it wasn't strong enough?
yeah, I feel like I don't exile enough though.
Hmm. So when you say you don't exile enough, do you think the game doesn't give you enough exile effects, or that you just
I feel like because of how many cards are in the deck, you can definitely go through games where you just never have a card that allows you to exile.
that's true.
Then again, I there are also like a lot of what are they called, like mystics or whatever in the
Yeah.
deck. Also, the funny thing is, there's only been one game that we've played where Chewbacca hasn't shown up, and there's only one Chewbacca out of all the 90 cards.
Very hairy around here. What's your favorite card that you've played so far? And why is it Darth Vader?
It's not. I haven't even been able to play it. It just gets killed so quick. I think my favorite card was what's the guy's name who he doesn't. I think he doesn't have attack until, but if the force is with you, he gets two attack, and when you play him, you get two force. He was really good because I feel
Oh,
like,
that's the guy from Rogue One. It's like Imwe Chewut or something. The guy
yeah,
who says I'm one with the Force and the Force is with me.
I think so.
Okay.
But I think he's one of my favorite cards because I don't really do much with the force a lot when I'm playing like Empire or something. But then the first time I played Rebels, I was like, oh, an extra resource. Now I can get Luke and I couldn't before, or something like that. So
Yeah.
being able to just take the force back, and then a lot of the time, it's gonna make the force be with you and giving you that plus two attack. I feel like it's really strong if you can play if you have the right under the right circumstances.
How hard do you think the game was to learn?
Not that hard. I feel like it was really easy to jump in for me on my first game.
Yeah, I feel like by not even the end of the first, like maybe two turns into the first game, you had it unlocked.
Yeah,
Like you really understood
I
everything.
am somebody who kind of is really good at learning games at the beginning. At least with a lot of the games that I've played, I can pick stuff up really quickly.
Do you have any criticisms? Any things you think the game doesn't do well?
I feel like, how do I say? I feel like I haven't seen every card, but a lot of the time I feel like I end up just seeing only like Imperial or only Rebel. And yeah, the like Rebels, I want to say this now. I guess this isn't really connected to what I say at the beginning, but I said at the beginning of the sentence. But the rebels they may start with the force, but the empire always goes first, and that's something that can't be taken from them, while the force can easily just be stolen. And I feel like I want the rebels to have a more permanent advantage,
Oh.
because the empire just has that permanent advantage that can't be taken away, and they can steal your advantage if you're the rebels too.
So, do you think that the attempt that the game made to balance first turn advantage, because going first is all in basically every game, going first is an advantage.
Yeah,
Uh,
but
that they tried to balance it with the force track, and it sounds like you feel like the force track wasn't
I
enough
feel
to
like
truly balance it.
this game was made by me. The Force would start in the middle, and then the Rebels would have their own thing. And like maybe the Force would do something else, and they just get that extra resource per turn, so that each side has a permanent advantage rather than the Empire always having that advantage, and then the Rebels getting their advantage. Because the Rebels, it's more like it can be straight up stolen from them before they even get a turn because of like the Inquisitors. So I feel like the Rebels should just have a better
Maybe if it was whichever player goes second gets an extra card or an extra two
yeah.
cards on that first turn, something like that. Maybe you
I
reduce.
feel
Okay,
that the
that's
Rebels should
fair.
have a bit more.
Overall, do you feel like the force tracker adds that much to the game?
I feel like it adds that battle for the Force,
Yeah,
and but in general, it's an okay mechanic. It's not bad. It's not
I wish it did a little
really
more.
agreed. But at the same time, I feel like it's a pretty good mechanic.
Okay, well, do you have any other thoughts? I guess we didn't talk about the card art. What do you think about the art?
Uh, I actually really like the art.
Yeah, I agree. I do too.
I noticed that none of it is kind of like photographic. It's all illustrated.
Yeah.
Which I really like. I really like because it kind of maintains that theme rather than having like a picture of somebody like a real person while they're acting and then another picture of them like that was illustrated side by side. It really adds it, making it feel like it's one continuous universe.
Even if it was all photographic, so you didn't have the comic book photo like
So
juxtaposition,
just kind of like
I still think that would be worse. I think the way it's drawn,
it's kind of like the industry.
yeah, yeah. In general, I like comic book style illustrations more than still photographs from movies in
Uh,
my games.
yeah. I mean, they do different things. Like a movie is made to be better visually, while like for the entire movie. Well, if you
Mm-hmm.
think about an illustration or a book, those are more to try and tell a story.
Yes. Well, taking a moving thing and cutting one still image out of it just isn't quite as good as some piece of art.
Somebody's running in the background, it's all blurry. But yeah,
Sure.
that's.
Yeah.
I really like the art. I think this is a good game overall. I really
Thumbs
enjoy
up,
it.
thumbs down, thumbs medium, thumbs up. There you go. All right. Any other final thoughts?
Uh, now I'm gonna steal your line. Go run some games.